do you have to be a credentialed Waldorf teacher to write curriculum or to support homeschoolers? And it's such a loaded question, but it's funny because it's something that I get in my email often. People will ask me questions about my experience, my background, and I know it comes up on the Facebook groups. And what's funny is those Facebook groups are intended for homeschoolers to support one another. And what happens is sometimes there's somebody in there that's not a homeschooler, or there are homeschoolers that give their opinion. So I want to start with this. I want to start with my background for those of you who don't know me. So my background is I have studied a lot of Steiner. I'm not a credentialed Waldorf teacher, but I have been studying Steiner for about 17, 18 years. So when I wanted a Waldorf education for my children, I lived in Southeast Idaho. There was no teacher training near me. There was no distance program at the time. And there was no school near me. Like for a long ways, there was no school. So what I wanted was this education for my kids. And so I had to be hungry. I had to be hunting for it. I had to find ways to bring it to my children without having a school or teacher training near me. So what I did was I dove in and really started looking at who had information out there that could be applicable to homeschoolers. And back in those days, Eric Fairman was one of the only people that had things for homeschoolers. And there was one other education company, and then there was also Oak Meadow. Neither one of those appealed to me. What really appealed to me was this idea that I could connect with teachers and really build something for my children. And so that's what I did. So I fell in love with Eric Fairman's A Path of Discovery guides, and they're not a full curriculum. They were just guides that are they're basically his teacher's notes for the year. Some of them are really full. Some of them just have lists of the books that he did and some of the content that he gave, but they were not a full curriculum. So I set out when my oldest son was approaching first grade to really try to figure it out, to really try to bring this to my children. At that time, so again, this is like 100 years ago, Rahima Baldwin Dancy, who wrote You Are Your Child's First Teacher, she had these Waldorf Homeschool conferences at the Sacramento Waldorf School. So I attended those very regularly. I attended those very regularly, and the more I learned and the better I got, then all of a sudden she asked me to teach for her. And so I attended as an attendee, and then I also later taught there. So what happened was, because I knew that that's what I wanted, I just had to study. So I just got very good at reading Steiner, like all the time. Read a lot of Steiner's lectures. Anything that I could get my hands on with regards to Steiner and education and what he had indications for the different grades, because at the time I had 3 children, and I just was really hungry to be able to bring this to my kids. So I studied his work directly. I didn't study another curriculum. I didn't study, another teacher. I studied his work directly, because when I would go to a teacher and ask, they would say, go check out this lecture, go read this. And so I had been doing that, and I felt very strongly about sort of putting together a guide after I had taught it the first and second time to my children. So I put together this guide, and I had written Eric Fairman, and I said, hey, I would really love to use the bare bones of the story that you have for my children. And he said, please write something, and then send it to me because I want to read it. So I wrote the Wise Sophia, our version of the Wise Sophia, from the inspiration that I received from him. Wrote our first grade curriculum, sent it to him, and he said he'd love to write the foreword for our book. So he wrote the foreword in our first grade curriculum. He is a Waldorf master teacher, and so when somebody says you have to be a Waldorf credentialed teacher in order to write a Waldorf curriculum, I say, hogwash. What you need is to be hungry. you need to be hungry and you need to seek out Steiner's work, because you wouldn't write a car manual and only have ridden a bicycle. So you wouldn't write anything about Waldorf and not have ever taught at home with regards to writing Waldorf curriculum. So what we have now, fast forward, about, gosh, that was even before we started Waldorf Essentials. So that was before I married Eric, that I had written that treatment, that very first bit, but I hadn't published it. I had written it. I was sharing it with some people, and I was looking for people to sort of help us with cover art and all of that. So that was 1,000 years ago, about 15 years ago. And then I met Eric, and I started coaching more. And then we wrote we wrote kindergarten curriculum first, and then we sort of put forward this first grade treatment that I had already put together. So I say that you need to be hungry, because if you're going to write your own curriculum, you need to know where it comes from. You need to know what those indications are. You need to understand those. And so the more I wrote, the more I realized I didn't want to rely on somebody else's interpretation of the curriculum. I wanted to rely on my own interpretation of the curriculum. And so what I bring to you in our Waldorf Essentials curriculum comes from years of studying and reading and understanding and digesting and asking Waldorf teachers that I truly respect, what do you think about this, and getting good feedback. And so with regards to us and what we wrote it based on Steiner's direct words, not necessarily based on what they do in the schools, because we're not in the school, we're at home. So yes, there is definitely this infusion of what you would find in a typical Waldorf school, but we do it at home, and so it has some differences to it. And so with that, you're going to find that, because I've been at home and I have 5 children, I can relate to moms because of that. So when we say we're the only homeschool curriculum that was written by homeschoolers for homeschoolers, we are. And I've studied Steiner extensively.
Waldorf Homeschool.
Yeah, the Waldorf. Did I say I meant Waldorf Homeschool curriculum? Yeah. Thank you, dear. So I want to get that out there before we talk about the next pieces. When the very first teachers taught in the very first Waldorf schools, they weren't Waldorf credentialed teachers. They were business people that came that had a common vision and a common goal, and they listened to Steiner and they took his work in. So a lot of what we did was inspired by that idea of, hey, I can just go to the feet of the actual master. Even though he's passed, he's left me this plethora of material to study. So with regards to the best way to study the material, one of my absolute favorite books that helps with this is Rhythms of Learning by Roberto Trossly. Now, if you're a Thinking, Feeling, Willing member, we talked to Roberto Trossly in a masterclass, and you have access to that. I would definitely go and listen to that. That masterclass was so much fun, and I do believe he'll come again. Maybe we can get him to come maybe in the spring and just talk about studying Steiner. That would be a really good topic. But what I had done was I had started reading Steiner, and yes, it's thick material. It's definitely thick material. But then I found Rhythms of Learning, and so Rhythms of Learning is nice because it sort of gives you some digestion a little bit of Steiner's work, but then gives you the place to jump off to for the next speech, the rest of the lecture kind of thing. So after I had been reading Steiner already for a little bit, then I had picked up Rhythms of Learning, and it sucked me in even more. So I'm sort of one of those weird people that reads Steiner for fun, and if you can read him long enough, you'll find the places where he was probably laughing when he sort of gave whatever snippet in the in the lecture that he had given, and so but you have to read it very continuously. So here's my process. Back then, years and years ago, they had just come out with Rudolf Steiner audio, and Dale, the gentleman who does that, sort of turned into Steiner in my head. So I would read a section, and I would listen to the audio of that section, and I would sleep on it. And then the next morning I would get up and I would recall what I had read and listened to and maybe make some notes about it. And then I would listen to the next section. So with Steiner or anything that's really deep and thick, you don't want to just decide you're going to sit down and read the whole thing, because it's a lot, and it's a lot for your brain to take in. And you sometimes have to slow down and go, what did I read, and reread it. And you want to be careful to not try to overwhelm yourself. And it's great to sort of read in sections when you're reading. So that's sort of how I approach it. And what's lovely is I had read all of the major ones that they have, that they require in the teacher training, and then started diving into extras, because it just couldn't get enough. I really wanted to understand, not just then for my children, but for your children that I was writing for, what is he actually saying here? And he says contradictory things sometimes. So definitely there were many times, and there are still times when I read something and I go, that's not what you said over here. But I'm going to read them both again, and I'm going to take it to prayer and meditation. I'm going to come back with what I feel the Spirit is telling me should happen. And it's so in line with what he actually said, because he said in the Knowledge of Higher Worlds and its Attainment, don't just take what I have as gospel truth. You should take the things that I'm giving you, take them in, make sure they resonate with you, and then come back with what you want to give back, what you want to bring to your children, what you want to study yourself, how you want to show up yourself. So in knowing that and in understanding that, I want you to take that question of, do you have to be a credentialed Waldorf teacher? And really sit with that, because I do not believe you do. I do believe that if you're going to write a Waldorf curriculum, you really need to study Steiner. Otherwise, it's probably somehow, maybe you could call it inspired by Waldorf, but if you're not going to actually read Steiner and understand what he said, then it's really hard for you to be able to understand those underpinnings from each grade level and each development level. So I definitely would say that that's like number one. Having studied Steiner is much more important than being a credentialed Waldorf teacher. And this is why I say that. Having somebody who studied Steiner for 15 plus years is much different than, and implemented it, is much different than somebody who just walked out of the teacher training with their certificate today and hasn't taught in a classroom, hasn't taught the curriculum, and doesn't understand the curriculum. So while I am very much in support of teachers for sure, and I think we need more Waldorf teachers. I see all the time all the job openings that are available because there's just not enough teachers. I definitely think that is a beautiful route to go. Please know that within our Thinking, Feeling, Willing program, we have Waldorf teachers that have decided to homeschool their children that realize, oh my gosh, I have all this knowledge, but I don't know how to do it at home. So we have several Waldorf teachers that have come home to teach, and they use our program. And we have several people within our program that have gone on to become Waldorf teachers. So I sort of sit in a space that feels very good of having those come in and having those leave that sort of want to do more. So I would say that really the best thing that you could do is be hungry for the material, be hungry to understand. And when you tell yourself you don't have time to do the reading, ask yourself, like, if I were studying something else like that you are passionate about, like maybe midwifery or healthcare or something, you would make the time. So you should make the time for this. That's one reason why I'm so hard on planning and meditation and being centered for your children, because this is what you've chosen as your vocation at home. Your vocation is to teach them. And in that, we have to do the study that's required of us. So one of the things that I try to do with our curriculum is tell you, I give you snippets of Steiner and then tell you where to go read more. And so I'm always encouraging you to go read more. If you're a member of our Thinking, Feeling, Willing program, then you have access to the links for within the mom lesson on writing your own curriculum, and in mom lesson 2, which is understanding the curriculum, of where to actually go to just read Steiner and really sort of dive into his work. Now, there are people that come back and go, but I just don't really agree with some of the things he says. That's okay. And you know what? He would have said, that's okay. Implement what feels good. Implement what feels right to you. Implement what makes your heart sing. Implement what moves you, because that which moves you spiritually is what's going to come forward as beautiful, artful lessons. So, for sure, you want to make sure you have that piece. Do I think you need to study him intently before you teach your first lesson? No, I don't. Do I think it should be something that you are, working towards, that you're ready to pick up a little bit here and a little bit there? Yes, absolutely. In fact, again, I would say Rhythms of Learning is the best place to go with that. It should be on every Waldorf homeschooler shelf so that you understand where to go and sort of how to find those answers. Kingdom of Childhood is probably one of the most accessible because he wrote it later in life, or it gave it later in life. So he had already had a lot of, this teaching behind him. And so that is probably one of the most accessible and easiest for people to take in. So that might be a good place to start. And then I would say, discussions with teachers. There's so many. There's a big list in Mom Lesson 2. So I would for sure hop there. There's also the what is it? The rsarchive.org. Is that right, dear? .org? RudolphSteinerArchive.org. I'm pretty sure that's right. They have a lot of lectures that are not in PDF form, but that you can just pull up on their site and read them.
Is RudolphSteinerAudio.com the one that you referred to having all the audio?
Yeah. While I think it's a pretty weighted question, I think that we all should bear the responsibility, since we are, really diving into this method for our children, to really understand what he said about it. Now, I will say up front, that doesn't mean you have to agree with everything he says. Absolutely not. The man wrote an amazing amount of stuff, like so much stuff. And I have read a lot, but I have absolutely not read everything. There are new things that I'm reading all the time. And then I had a stroke 5.5 years ago. And all of I used to have okay, this is where he said that. And this is where he said that. That's all gone. What's there is just what he said. So I'm often going back now and trying to refine things so that I know exactly where he said what he said. But for sure, take the time to do some reading, and it's okay if you disagree with some things. There are going to be things that you're gonna be like, nope, sorry, that doesn't work for me. That's okay. Doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's the part that's I think really important for you to gather. There are some of the things that he said about spirituality where I was like, not quite there for me, but that's all right. The rest of it is. And that's sort of where I want you to come from. I think that you don't have to be a Waldorf teacher to teach at home. You become a Waldorf teacher when you start to take in the information, not just from Steiner, but when you really start to, read our curriculum from the very front all the way through, decide that you're hungry for more information, decide that you want more, discussing it with people. That's when you become a Waldorf teacher in your home. That's when you become this teacher that wants more. We want this artful education that's developmentally centered for our children. That's when you become a teacher in your home. And all of you are teachers in some way. That doesn't mean you're a credentialed Waldorf teacher to walk into a classroom, but that's okay. You're in your classroom. That's what's important for you and your child. I think there used to be such a stigma where there were so many teachers that were completely against what we do at home. And more, they're softening and coming around. That and I have a great group of different teacher friends that completely support homeschooling, where we're deemed necessary by the parent, or when because there's so many people that don't have access to a Waldorf school, whether it be location wise or they don't have $18,000 to plunk down on education. Totally get it and totally understand. And so there are a bunch of teachers that are there ready to support. And, I've tried to really bring a lot of those teachers in with our master classes that we hold for our Thinking, Feeling, Willing members, and really help there be a connection. But, there used to be such a disconnection. And if you live near a school, but you're a homeschooler and you're determined to stay a homeschooler, connect with the school anyway. Go to their festivals, support the school, see if you can have some kind of support with it there. That is really how we sort of break down that weird barrier and sort of help them to see that we're actually like studying. We're actually moving the education forward. I think that's so, so important that that really people understand that that's the Waldorf Essentials goal, is to move forward Waldorf education in a home setting for people who can't bring it to a school or who choose not to.
Because of Waldorf, we have discovered our 7-year-old is very artistically talented. She learns best through art. Hallelujah. We've reached our very sweet ADD year with this curriculum.
Yay, that's so awesome. I get love letters like that, like almost every day. It's so wonderful when we can see those changes that happen within our children and really sort of like go, wow, I wouldn't have seen this otherwise. I would not have experienced this otherwise. This is amazing that I opened this door to my child and children that have other kinds of struggles, because, I've got, my oldest is on the spectrum. Our youngest has got something going on, something of her very own. But we wouldn't see those beautiful pieces bloom if they weren't in this kind of setting. And so while I see that for kids with special needs going on, then I look at my neurotypical children and I go, wow, mind blown and blown away, because they really sort of dive into things so much differently than their peers, so much differently than those around them. And that's not meant to be negative about their peers. It's meant to be positive about what we're doing. And it's really easy, I think, to get in a positive, negative, like tug of war, but you don't have to. We just are. And this is what we do. And this is what we find valuable to our family and what we believe is the best for our family. That's not everybody's reality. Somebody else's reality and desire and value for their family might be to send them to the school down the street. And that's okay. That's okay. No judgment, just observation. I hope that I have sort of dispelled this idea that that you have to be a credentialed Waldorf teacher to write homeschool curriculum. What I think is really funny is the other day, sometimes I am not very good at keeping adult conversation just among adults. And I had said something to Eric about somebody else's product, about, so-and-so, and just observation on my part, like that they hadn't homeschooled. And I had it, they're writing a curriculum, they haven't homeschooled. And Soraya, she says, I'm confused. If they haven't homeschooled, how do they know what to tell homeschoolers to do? Don't you have to homeschool in order to know that? Out of the mouths of babes. Yes, you do. You can understand what happens in the classroom otherwise, but until you've actually walked the walk and been a homeschooler to more than one child and really understood what it looks like when you're exhausted and things are falling down around you and your house is a big old mess, if you haven't done that, you probably ought to leave the homeschool writing curriculum to the homeschoolers. Just saying. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you all have a wonderful week.